tomorrow night at Centennial Hall at 8 o'clock, and I'd like to welcome you to London and indeed to North America.
Well, yeah, it's very nice to be here. The usual things, but it really is very nice to be here.
This is, I take it, your first time to London.
Yes, in London, yes. It's very nice place.
You're kicking off your North American tour here, then you're going to Toronto. Where's the rest of the tour going to take you?
Well, Montreal, Ottawa, and then into Boston, and we end up in Nashville, I think, September the 15th. So it's roughly 8 weeks, which for the Smiths is very extensive, because we don't really travel that often.
That's your second time in North America?
Yes.
What will the audience? What do you think the audience will expect? What can they expect that's new, say, from your last tour?
Well, I suppose nothing really extremely different. I think we always just really simply rely upon the songs, and that's as far as we go. And if it happens with the songs, then it happens, and if it doesn't, then it doesn't. We don't really go in for anything terribly flamboyant or outrageously dazzling on stage. It's just really quite basic, but very strong, we feel.
You're using a lot of your new songs in the show.
Yes, we are using songs, and some that haven't even been recorded, so.
What was the reaction in Europe to your songs, if you've been playing them there?
Well, in England, we don't really travel too much in Europe, but in England, it's remarkably strong, very hysterical, very attentive, and very wild. So we usually do leave an impression of some degree. They're usually quite hysterical, insane affairs.
Oh, really?
But I'm sure tomorrow will prove the exception to the rule.
Well, last year you were interviewed by Graffiti Magazine here in Canada, and you said that something to the effect that it would only be a matter of time before the Smiths were accepted by a much wider audience in North America, though you still seem to have remained in the cult status here.
Yes, but no, I mean, it is building. It is building in a very basic way. There still remains virtually no advertising for the Smiths on a record company level, but really more people are hearing us. And the letters we receive are quite phenomenal, really. It confuses me, because I can come here and I can open magazines and see no presence whatsoever. I can listen to radio stations and I never hear the Smiths. And yet, but in another way, in practically a more affecting way, it really is happening. Because certainly in America, the ticket sales are really very healthy, and in Toronto, really healthy. Last year in Toronto was one of the most memorable affairs that we ever had at Kingswood.
Yes, I was there.
Yes, it was really quite strong. And there's not really any reason why these things should happen, but they do. So I think when it's really left up to the Smiths just to promote themselves, it works. But on a record company side, it doesn't work. They still don't really know what the Smiths are, and they don't really know how to convey what the Smiths are, or to promote them in any really sensible way, because all the very obvious brackets and all the very obvious avenues, we don't really seem to belong there. And so record company people tend to throw up their hands and say, well, what can we do?
And so, well then how would you define success in North America? Obviously you're very happy with the sort of loyal following that you have.
Yes.
Would you still like to break onto the airwaves?
I think we can do both. I really do, because I often feel that we can gain live audiences. We can gain live audiences by practically, on a promotion level, not really trying. So I wonder, if we really tried, if the record company really pushed us, something extreme could happen. I mean, I know friends of mine and people I know generally who are in groups who have become very successful in North America, selling lots of records and going top 30 and even top 10, yet on a live level people just don't turn up. And I wouldn't really like to belong to that world. I'd rather that people did turn up and we weren't massive in that very overbearing sense, that everywhere you turn you hear and you pictures and songs by this group. I'd rather really have the people there, because I think when people are loyal and when audiences are loyal, I think they're there forever, really. And they don't need to be told. I'm convinced. I'm wrong, obviously, but, you know.
In the past, you've been critical of record companies, especially the big record companies in the big business of selling records.
Yes.
How does that affect your relationship, or how do you characterize that with your relationship with Rough Trade?
Well, Rough Trade have always... when we signed to Rough Trade and we became successful, the situation was that Rough Trade were having national success for the first time ever. So everything was very, very new to them, and they approached it in a very, not naive way, but in a very, very non-capitalist way. So that was interesting. That was interesting for us. But I'm not really sure how I could deal with the very severe, the kind of the prostitution level of a major record company, saying whatever it is, do it. You know, if we're going to sell, 10,000 more records, 100,000 more records, just do it. Put this skirt on, put this orange wig on, do it. I don't think I could really live in that world. Not really.
The lyrics you write suggest a background in English literature. Is there a background there?
Yeah, sadly, yes.
Yes, I've noticed that. Then do you see your lyrics merely as one half of the Smiths songs, or do you aspire to give them some intrinsic poetic value? You like them?
Well, yes, I think poetic. Ultimately, we have to say poetic. I don't like to, because I didn't really read that much poetry. I was never really terribly interested in poetry. But I suppose ultimately, when you examine the works of other people in popular music, I suppose if one is forced to, one has to describe the way I write as poetic, whether you like it or not. It's kind of poetic and poetic ramblings. But I prefer to think of it as merely just being direct and almost conversational. It's poetic, of course, merely because it isn't nonsensically bland, which obviously most words are. People who write words never think about them. They just throw them in. There's like this dictionary, this popular music dictionary, which everybody adheres to. This kind of awful lexicon of the most fundamental language on earth, which really confuses me. It confuses me why people use such fundamental language when the whole sphere of popular music is so incredibly strong and affects every individual on earth.
Would you like, say, in 200 years down the road, would you like your lyrics read as poetry, much as we read classical lyric verse today?
It's inevitable. It's inevitable. I can't escape that fact.
You mentioned your background in English literature. Is that as a student, or just that you read a lot, or brought up
I
in
just
an environment?
read, really. I read manically as a child and then as a teenager. I didn't really have any specific education to speak of. I certainly never went to university or anything approaching university, so I just really read out of instinct. I was very interested in books, always.
And in a song like I'll Suffer Little Children, which had a lot to do with Wuthering Heights, was that intentional?
Yes, to get well, also considering the case that it dealt with, which was the Moors murders, which happened in Manchester in the early 1960s, and also happened on the moors, which is obviously a very eerie and poetic and mystical and mysterious place. So yes, all interlinked.
Go between you and Johnny Marr in writing the songs.
It's very, very simple. It's very simple. He merely puts I say merely as if it sounds like, eating breakfast cereal. He's puts a tune on a tape, on a cassette tape, and I live with it, and suddenly I'm humming a vocal tune, and then suddenly, quite mysteriously, I'm singing these strange words, and then thankfully I generally like the words, and then the song happens, and it's just there. It's a very, very quick, very uncluttered and unfussy process. We've never ever had trouble. We've never sat down and scratched our head and said, well, what do people do when they write songs? How do you write a song, and how do you write a hit single? It's just always been very, very natural.
So the lyrics that come out of you are very natural.
Very natural.
Just
troublingly natural.
Except for the odd pot shots at royalty and an anthem like Meat is Murder, your songs have remained fairly apolitical, or largely apolitical. And obviously that is something that's natural.
Yes. I think I've seen too many groups in the past who align themselves rigidly and steadfastly with certain political causes. I find that when the causes die, the groups die, the people die, and they get washed away. I think you can make really strong statements without becoming, without really killing yourself and losing your identity as an individual.
Does that have anything... Oh, you came out criticizing Live Aid when it organized. Is that behind what you were just saying?
Yes, and I find now, interestingly, that criticism of Live Aid is just simply growing and growing and growing.
Becoming trendy.
Well, perhaps not trendy. I mean, it's too easy to say that it's trendy. I mean, maybe people actually have a point. I'm sure they do. I like to think they do. But there was a time when I seemed to be the only individual who suspected something sly and occurring. And at that time I was beaten to death, literally, for having such views. And now, of course, they're all coming out and saying, well, yes, and where did that money go to? And why is this solo LP appearing? And why is this man being knighted by the Queen? And so on. It all seems very show business.
In the past, you've sort of bristled at people have said your music is depressing. How would you define your music then?
Well, I think that we speak for now, and the Smiths, regardless of what you think of them, they are realistic. And we're living today and we're living now as many humble people tend to live. There's nothing escapist. You can't really escape into the Smiths. It's really like reading a newspaper, which a lot of people don't like to do, but really we have to. I mean, these are critical times. You can't really pretend anymore. But I notice, and I'm sure it's not an accident, that as the times that we live in become more serious and more critical, popular music, which is such a ferociously fierce and strong art form, goes further and further away from reality. And I almost feel that it's almost a political thing, that there's like a whitewash occurring, that the most nonsensical and useless, bland artists are being pushed forward, and we're being force-fed. And any groups who dare to confront very real issues in a very realistic way are silenced, are gagged. So this is something that we constantly have to fight against. I mean, the Smiths in England have had 10 consecutive hit singles, and we've had huge LPs, and yet we still are never played on national daytime radio. They will not play the Smiths. I mean, even this week, today, we were the highest new entry in the top 100 with a new single called Panic, came in at number 18, and they won't play it. So what do? You have to suspect. You have to suspect that there's some fierce political canoodlings occurring.
What about Hang the DJ?
Well, Hang the DJ is a recurring line in the new single Panic, which probably won't be released here, but released in England. And once again, as ever, we're finding problems. I can't really imagine why. But as I say, this single Panic has entered really highly, and they won't play it because of this line, Hang the DJ. They say it's offensive. I can't really imagine why, because when we sing Hang the DJ live, people are ecstatic. This is what they want. They want to get rid of all these old, boring, middle-aged non-entities, these mediocre people who are really controlling the airwaves. And 50% of the daytime disc jockeys in England are absolutely detested by the people in England. They hate them. And yet here they are, controlling our earlobes, practically. So I'm all for hanging certain DJs. So watch out.
What are your musical influences?
My musical... I'm an insane record collector, but I like... I'm absorbed in the 1960s singles, 45s, which for some reason don't really seem to be massively popular here in a collectible sense. Like in England, you can go into rare record shops and they have stacks of old 45s and singles, but I've never found a place like that here, which confuses me. It seems to be more, people seem more concerned with albums, which is nice nonetheless, but I really like pop music. I never really liked anything avant-garde or anything obscure. really pop music, British pop music main, but of course lots of American things infiltrated. But I'm really deeply absorbed in British pop of the 1960s. I think it was a great time.
Your voice seems like a bit of a throwback almost to the era of the crooners.
Well, yes. I mean, I listen to lots of people who fall into that bucket. Yes, crooners. I like lots of soaring, theatrical, old melodies and whatever. I mean, I even like Doris Day. So what hope is there for me?
What about the rest of the band?
Well, Johnny is very similar. I mean, we just go off together and we look for rare record shops, rare record stores, and his record collection is massive and very wide, very varied. So, no, we really like the pop single. We're very intrigued by the pop single, the hit single. And I can't really imagine many of the modern hit singles that we know today really being looked back on in years to come as classic rather, not classical, in much the same way that we look back on so many of the records of the 1960s as being an absolute classic. Maybe the best has gone, really, of popular music.
Do you really believe that?
I wouldn't say it otherwise.
I wouldn't say it otherwise.
I'm not looking for laughs.
Because you're the group's front man, and I believe most outspoken member, you seem to sometimes overshadow the other three members. Do you feel your renown has unjustly overshadowed them?
Well, we don't really see it that way because we're very close as individuals, so it never really comes down to the situation where we really tot up or try to chart the profile of each member. That never happens. It's just a very natural thing. Initially, I had more to say than anybody else did, and so I found that I was really saying it, and I was forward. And so it's just really very natural, and it works to harmonious effect. So there's nothing very political or very fascist involved. I wish there was.